All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of Triple Play. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. I said it for you today.
Thank you.
And don't forget to support those that support us, such as Annie McCollum and Resource One at 636-458-1798, or CS Design, Chris and his team. If you have any computer needs at 573-436-3717. I guess I should say, just in case you're newer, that Annie McCollum and his team do anything dealing with financial needs. So if you need a refinance, or you need to look at your home, if you need to look at your retirement, anything like that, they do all that kind of stuff. So they're financial advisors. They got a team of them that do a great deal. And moving on, we also got a great insurance company, Jeff Earhart Agency of State Farm. And you can give those guys a call at 314-821-JEFF, which is 5333, according to the great Andy Van Slyke. Mm-hmm. So, but all that said,
who we got today?
Today we have somebody who is probably my most requested person I've ever had. She doesn't even, I mean, I'm serious. I remember when we had Jay Moore on here? Yeah. As soon as Jay got done, he said, you need to have Jodi on. I didn't even know who she was until everything started happening with COVID shutdown. And then my wife was like, you need to follow this gal. She's on her, she's fighting the fight that we're fighting with all these things going on. And so you had this Facebook page that you had. So I started following you on that and watching you, and we were, doing our part that we could to hopefully get involved in the system. So all that said, I've had multiple requests from different folks who've said we need to get you on here. So we are glad to have you on here, Jodi. And Jodi started a ministry called Jodi Grace Ministry. So I'm excited to learn more. I know a little bit about you from your Facebook page, from following things, but I know there's a lot more, especially when I was looking at your ministry page and seeing several of the events that I've been seeing you pop up at here in the St. Louis region. So it's great to have you today.
Yeah, well, thanks. I appreciate you being here. Yeah, it's funny to me to hear, you got people asking. I'm not used to that, so
it means you're doing something.
This is new territory for me. But thanks so much. I appreciate you.
Well, we appreciate you being here. You had a little bit of a drive. Was it okay?
Yeah, it's great. Came from Jefferson City and stopped off, had a meeting on my way, and got a meeting after this. So yeah, it's all
productive.
Busy day.
Busy day.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that being said, you just said that you're from Jeff City. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're also, I know, a fellow believer. So give us a little bit about your testimony and where you came from, the St. Louis question or Missouri question, where you went to high school. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, just your journey, a little bit about how you ended up in the chair you're in.
Yeah,
right now.
Well, that's just all God, right? So yeah, I grew up in West Plains, spent the majority, all of my childhood there. So I'm a Zizzer. I went to school in West Plains, and that's home. Still have family there. And went to college at Drury. So as far as college goes, I'm a Panther. And my degree's in education, actually. I actually taught in the public school system for a few years. It's been quite some time since I've been there. Got married, got 4 boys, and been at home for 20 plus years now, raising kids.
So you taught you've been home now from no teaching for over 20 years?
Not in the public school. Now we've homeschooled, we've done a little private school, so.
Okay.
But no, not in public school for, Jackson's 21, so 21 years.
Yeah, my wife stopped public school. She did 7 years and then stopped after we had our firstborn and hadn't taught in the public school for 19 years. We're now 20.
Yeah, so that's me. And we moved, I've really spent most of my life in southern Missouri, southwest Missouri, in the Springfield, Nixa area. But we moved to Jefferson City in 2019, just before COVID hit.
Okay.
Because I've got some family there, and my husband has some family in Columbia and in that area of the state. So we ended up in Jefferson City. And then COVID hit, and, it was just a difficult transition to be in a new city, and all the churches shut down, and the kids were home from school, and all of that sort of thing. But, as far as my faith, I mean, goodness, like I was one of those girls that was in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, and for choir practice and all of the things. If the church doors were open, we were there. And so I've loved Jesus for all of my life that I can remember. and been involved in just different ministries along the way. Led praise and worship for a long time, and a women's ministry. And of course, I was a kid person, so they always stick the kid people in the children's department, So I've just been involved in the church in a variety of ways over the years, really. And but then 2019, we end up in Jefferson City. COVID hits. The world goes crazy. And, then we have that crazy presidential election in 2020. And I was kind of shocked at the way that all played out. And I really thought that something would happen and they would fix it, right? Like something would happen and God would take care of it. And that's not what happened. And then, January 6th happened, and I felt like there were people in prison that really didn't belong there. And I just began to be really concerned about my kids. They're at the stage now, my boys are at the stage, the older two are kind of launching out into the world and getting ready to start careers and things like that. And so I just began to really think, what is their life going to be like? Are they going to be able, and I've got all boys, so, in my mind, they need to be able to provide and support a family. And, are they going to be able to do that the way that we have been doing it, the way that I've been able to do that with my husband? And so I just started to pray at my kitchen table. I'd send the kids to school and sit down with my Bible and pray, and just really got serious about the prayer and asking God, what's my place here in this? What am I supposed to do, if anything? Are we supposed to just stock up extra groceries in case the world really falls apart? Or do I have a place? Am I supposed to do something? And he pretty clearly, I felt like, spoke to me and said, go to the Capitol. And kind of felt that whisper in my spirit to read the parable of the talents again. And I did. And, the end of the parable of the talents, the guy who just buries the one talent, the other two guys get, I think, 10 and 5 or 10 and 2 or something. And the master goes away and the master comes back then and they've doubled their portion, right? Like they've invested and stewarded and done whatever it is that they've doubled their portion. But the guy who had one was scared and buried it. And then when the master came back, that guy got in really big trouble. Like, if you haven't read it in a while, and I had, it's a familiar parable to me, but I hadn't read it in a while at that point. And so I went back and really, when you get to that part, he gets cast out. That guy gets cast out. It wasn't like the master said, oh, you did a great job. I'm really proud of you. Let's try again. That's not what happened. He had really severe consequences. And I just felt like God spoke to me and said, that's what you've done with this government. And this government was a gift to be stewarded and taken care of and invested in. And my people haven't done that. And so I just felt very convicted then to actually go, like I felt like he was asking me to do. And so I went, and it was just one of those things. I didn't know what I would do when I got there. I didn't know anybody there. And he just really, like when you step out in faith and then the doors start to open and he brings the people and makes the connections and the relationships start to build. And so that's when I started that Facebook group. And that just grew like crazy.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge need. I think that people are wanting to see changes. They're seeing what's going on, especially believers. But I think even just the world in general, there's a lot of people watching what's going on and a lot of chaos, a lot of bad decisions being made. And they don't feel like their voice is being heard or that they can make a difference. And we've watched our government go out of control, and it's on both. There's not a party that's cleaner. They're both very dirty, and the people who have now gotten involved, I won't say all of them. There are some, I think, good people involved in politics, but by and large, it seems like the system itself, even if you go in with good intentions, once you start playing the game, it doesn't take long before you're just another rat in the game and another guy who's started with good intentions, and now you've become exactly who you started fighting against. So,
Yep, that's exactly correct.
So after the Capitol, you start moving, doing some things. Eventually you get to Jodi Grace Ministries. What's that time like from now until, when you first go to the Capitol and now? What's that time look?
So I went in the late winter of 2021, and that was kind of at the tail end of COVID. So there were some COVID-related pieces of legislation that I was able to get involved with and kind of learn the process. Mm-hmm. And once I started that Facebook group and I started to do just some really simple, like fly by the seat of your pants type of videos.
People like those.
Right? Like I would just take my phone and just say, hey, we're getting ready to meet with so-and-so. Could you pray about this? Because of, whatever was going on. And that that group grew like crazy. And so then people started asking me to come speak. Would you come tell us about what you're learning and what's happening? And so I kind of told God, I'll say yes to all the doors that you open. And so I started going to speak to little groups, just a variety of types of groups, political groups, church groups, just a variety of people. And then in 2022, I went back to do that same thing. Our session starts in January and goes to mid-May. So January of 2022, I was back at the Capitol, and I had built some relationships with some legislators. That was an election year. And so I got asked to get involved in some campaigns. And so I did, and I learned a whole lot about the campaign process. And so I spent a lot of time in 2022 working on campaigns, paying attention to legislation also, and still doing a lot of that, but kind of got a baptism by fire in the campaign world. And then this past year, and of course, all the while that's going, people are still asking me to come and speak. I started blogging, just kind of one little piece at a time. And then this past year, I was there at the Capitol pretty much every day that the legislators were there. So if they were in session, I was there with a friend of mine. And we just really started asking the question, a lot of special interest groups. We were talking about education a little bit ago. There's several different groups who are there because they have a particular passion with a specific interest, whether it's vaccines or education or, whatever it is. And my friend and I started asking the question, well, we know you're focusing on this and you're focusing on this over here, but what are they actually doing? What are the legislators actually doing? What are they actually passing? Because we know they're not really passing what the special interests that we're concerned with, like the freedom-loving special interest groups, right? They're not passing a lot of that legislation or things that we would consider more conservative measures, policy. So what are they doing? And so we started paying attention just to actually what was moving. What are they doing? And after session, we printed off all of the bills, read them all, the ones that actually passed. And in that process, I really was still praying, and God just began to speak that, all the political strategy isn't going to work without me. It will only be by my hand that you actually win this war. And I felt like he just asked me to gather the believers and to start. I've done a lot of educating all of this time. I have a real heart, because I'm an educator at heart, to just educate the real people, And so I've blogged and have an email list and do the videos on Facebook and that type of thing. And it's just grown.
Have you, what did anything stick out when you read that list of legislation that had passed more recently? You're smiling like something is sticking out.
It's all bad.
Yeah. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be good, but.
What sticks out to me is that we have some real process problems. And I believe that those really lie at the feet of leadership, the House Speaker, the Senate Pro Tem, the majority floor leaders who control the action on the floor. But what we saw this session, and I tracked all the votes, so I have all the votes from all the legislation that passed. And what we see a lot of the time, I would say 75 to 80% of the time, is that they're all voting together. And I'm talking about the Democrats and the Republicans. And so what that means when they all vote yes is that now we're passing, it's really no different than DC, honestly. They're passing omnibus bills, multi-subject bills, which is unconstitutional in the first place. And they put enough in there that the Democrats are happy too. So we're passing Democrat priorities, or they would be voting no. We'd see more party line vote.
Yeah.
But when everybody's voting yes, that means there's enough in there that it makes that group happy and this group happy for whatever reason.
And they end up calling that nonpartisan bill?
They'll say it's nonpartisan, but then when you dig in and you read the thing, we have some real problems.
Doubly partisan.
Yeah. We see a lot of centralization of government. So, for instance, they passed what's called interstate compacts for our medical workers, our healthcare professionals, social workers, and counselors. So if you think in terms of our culture and where we've been the last few years, both in terms of pandemic and in terms of the far left and the school issues and the mental health issues, that play into the LGBTQ stuff. Mm-hmm. And then social workers are our families, right? Like that's the government path into our families. They passed interstate compacts for all three of these professions and opened up a pathway for these professionals to be licensed by a federal commission. The excuse is, well, we want for our professionals to be able to practice in other states and for people to be able to move around more freely without having all the red tape of, passing more tests or filing more paperwork when they move between states.
Sure.
And I would say that's a good thing also. We want for our professionals, we want to attract people to Missouri, make it easy for them to practice. However, we could already do that. We already had the ability to have reciprocity with any state we wanted. But this commission is made up of one person from each member state that's a bureaucrat, not an elected official. It's housed in DC. And we have written into our statute that any of the rules that commission creates will be enforced as state statute. Regarding our medical field, the counselors, and the social workers.
By unelected people?
By unelected people.
That doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right, does it?
No.
It seems like we have given away a little piece of our state sovereignty and put it in the hands of a commission that by and large, I believe, would probably be much less conservative than what Missouri is. We only have one representative on that commission. It'll be a bureaucrat, along with one rep from every state who opts in. So just depending on the states that opt in, which we have no control over,
right,
that'll dictate what happens on the commission. And when you're talking about something that happens in DC, it's just probably not going to be good. I don't think.
It costs a lot of money.
So, those rules will be enforced as state statute. They can even bring suit against the state if we violate. All of those professionals will have to comply with all the rules, including participate in all of the data, whatever the data collection looks like, whatever they would mandate that way. It's just not good.
Yeah, anytime you're consolidating, not your opinion, anytime you're consolidating, that's exactly what this country was trying to get away from was consolidation, that the states would have their ability to rule each state individually with just an umbrella of guidance for us all to grab along with, So, yeah, and you're absolutely right. Just a little bit here and a little bit there is how your freedom is taken, right? You wake up one day and they've nitpicked, and they always seem to do this with, I think, as conservatives, we forget the long-term plan. These guys think much longer down the road. All these things that we're dealing with now aren't things that that weren't planned out 10 and 15 and 20 years ago. People were planning these things out. If we just can take this little piece, if we can take that little piece, and then we'll put our person in there because eventually we'll get elected or whatever, because this political sway will go between Republican and Democrat, but in the meantime, you put enough of those little things and make us happy, we'll vote with you.
Right. And so really what we see like overall is I believe that they're really just bit by bit, puzzle piece by puzzle piece, sort of building an infrastructure, right? And just like with the energy business, and I don't know what's happening specifically in your area with your electric co-ops or your electricity providers. But, it's been a few years ago that they passed legislation, and I wasn't involved then, so I don't know all the details, but they passed legislation that changed the way that they can do that billing. And ushered in these smart meters, right? With the excuse or they sell it as being convenient. And of course, we want all the latest technology and all of these things. But those smart meters on your houses now have the ability of not only do they know how much energy you've used, but they know how you used it, when you used it, what you're doing, if you're running your air conditioner or your heater or your refrigerator or whatever. They can get very detailed data from those smart meters. And now what we see in places, I know it's happening in Kansas City, I would assume it's happening over here somewhere, is that we're rolling out these new rate plans where they're going to charge you more based on the time that you're using.
Yeah, they're doing energy. That. Yeah, they're doing that. Which
forces us to change our behaviors, right? Like if they're going to charge us more from 4 to 8 or whatever, the times that we're actually home using things, then they can push us to behave a certain way. So it's just interesting. There's a lot of little puzzle pieces that come into play that really do play into ultimately what I believe is this effort toward globalization, right?
Sure, sure. Yeah, the Antichrist.
Yeah.
Well, they're going to have to they're doing carbon tax, all that stuff. They're going to have to know what to charge you, all that stuff.
Yeah. So it's happening. I feel like a lot of Missourians feel still sort of insulated from a lot of the problems that the rest of the country is facing. Again, maybe not so much here in St. Louis because you guys have really struggled in ways that other parts of Missouri haven't.
Well, sure, but we saw. I mean, there wasn't a big push to pass legislation to help us for almost 2 years when all that stuff was going on. And a big chunk of that was from the quote-unquote conservative part of the state, which was all southern Missouri.
Right.
All the legislators up here were wanting to pass bills and taking, presenting bills down in Jeff City. And we were finding out that it was, all these speakers and all those, they were all from the lower part of the state, Springfield and all that, which should be quote unquote more conservative, more outliers, and they weren't. So,
yeah, I think the people in those more rural areas are definitely more socially conservative, but oftentimes in those more rural areas you have more poverty, and so in some other ways they're not as conservative as what maybe we would expect.
Well, I think also they're usually built around an industry, and if that industry has a hold on that politician, that so if you're from southern Missouri and your whole town is making money by steel, because the thing that keeps you alive is a steel mill there or a steel assembly plant, okay, and they come to you and say, we need this to get done, and it's on one of those you may disagree with 90% of it, but it has that 10% that you need for your town. Do you want to go back to your town? Because what they're going to do is tell your town that you didn't vote for their raises or this freedom for them to make more money in their town. And I found a lot of that kind of stuff was going on. There's a couple of wealthy people in that area that sponsor a lot of those state reps, and they like to cherry pick who's going to run. And of course, a lot of people don't know who to always vote for because they may know the person growing up, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know them, right? I mean, we just had that happen here locally where I was talking to folks in our last school board election, and they're like, this gal's conservative, and she's selling herself like that. And I said, but if you look at her Facebook page and her Twitter page, she's anything but a conservative. And but that's how she was selling herself,
right,
to people around her. And I don't doubt that maybe at one point she was. I talked to some neighbors that knew her, and she had been conservative 15 years ago. But I think over time had drifted much more to a liberal moderate side. And but was selling herself as conservative. I mean, conservative is a big word, right? I mean, I read, what really clued me in on that word was actually Greenspan. When he retired, he wrote a book, and I read it because it was on like the history of the Fed from his time there, and helping, like, even before then, when he was a political junkie, helping Nixon get elected and things like that. So he was involved a long time. And he takes you all the way to 9/11 when his wife is working in Washington or in New York for a major television network. He's, president calls him, we just had this attack, all that kind of stuff, right? So he's a great, interesting book. And in the second half was what he predicts for the future at the time. This book's old now. But what was interesting in all that was his political view, even though he helped like people like Nixon get elected. When you started reading to it, you're like, dude, you're not conservative in any way. The only way you're conservative is fiscally. That was it. Mm-hmm. Did he care? All the other check marks? None. He had one check mark. And I find a lot of people are like that. They'll be like, I'm conservative. And you start talking to them and you'll find out they're just one little area. Maybe it's the fiscal area. Maybe it's just the pro-life area. But you go down to the other parts of it and they're like, no. And you're like, how can you call yourself a conservative and be against 90% of what they stand for? But also, I would say that they've done a bad job of branding what conservatism is, too. They don't really go out and say these are the 10 things that really brand us as conservatives. So you get a lot of nut jobs and a lot of people who jump in. And
that's exactly what's happening in Congress right now, right? I mean, for me, like 70% of Republicans, I'm like, you're not, no, go, like, you're not, go away. And that's, I think, what Gates is doing, is calling those people out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be really nice to see Republicans who actually vote according to the platform. I'm not even sure some of these guys who are in office know what the platform says.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And then you got these backdoor deals that are coming. But I will say, the thing that's nice, Trump was the sledgehammer that really kind of exposed the deep state, let's call it, or the bureaucracy. But I will say it's interesting for the first time in my life to hear even a Democrat like Robert Kennedy calling out some of the stuff that we've been seeing. And, Vaswamy, there's this young, you look at the younger generation of even guys who are running right now. You get past Trump and the next two or three in line, which are, like DeSantis or Vaswamy, those guys are, you listen to what their platform says, and they're acknowledging, hey, we've seen what's been exposed by Trump, but we got to clean up the party. We got to clean up this, and we got to get rid of, the bureaucracy. That's one of the things I've really, really liked about Vaswamy's platform. The more I've watched him, is the fact that he's not only talked about it, but actually said, here's how it can be done. Whether he does it or not, hopefully somebody grabs that plan, because it's very practical how we can get rid of the bureaucracy, the three little acronyms like the FBI. And he was talking about the Federal Reserve the other day. And his plan makes sense. We don't need all this. It's all fat that's not in the Constitution. And, he's become a constitutionalist. I guess the knock against him is that 10 years ago, in his earlier years, in his 20s, he was much more left-leaning. But I get that a lot, because you'll find people who are left-leaning, and then as they get older, it reminds me of a guy at the gym. A friend of mine, Will, we're working out when he first came down from Chicago, completely left, would not, Trump was getting, this is like the first Trump election. I can't even believe that you'd vote for anybody on the right, and let alone him. And then now, yeah, man, my dad can't believe it. I'm telling him I'm going to vote for Trump this next election if he gets nominated. And I said, well, what changed? He goes, well, you get a house, you pay taxes, you got a job, you get out of college, and life changes, and you start paying attention to all that stuff, and then the values, in college, you think everybody should get high on pot, and now it's like you start to realize there's consequences for all that when you get a little bit older and a little wiser, and that, but I see that a lot. You see that it's kind of like in a church. You'll see a lot of college kids leave the church. When do they come back? When they have a house and start a family and get married and start having kids, there's what is that? I read the last stat was like 80% of all youth raised in a church will leave. 30% of them will come back when they have their first kid, and another 20% will come back with their second kid, and then the rest will never come back. So there's these changes in life that bring back, the importance of things, I think, at times. And you see that a little bit in people. So all that said, I want to get a little bit more about your ministry too, because I've been paying attention, and not only have you started the podcast, so that's more recent, right?
Yeah, just in the last couple of weeks. So, I do love to write, so the blog has worked out really well, but I can get a lot more said on a podcast than I can in a blog post. So I can cover a lot more material doing it this way, and it's just easier for me to do. So I thought I'd give it a try, and I actually really like it. So about 3 days a week, there's an episode. It's called Arise and Build, and of course, it's, on all the major podcast platforms. Maybe one of these days I'll start videoing and
so you do
YouTube. I don't know.
As long as people can hear you.
Yeah, you're on the audio side then, right?
Yeah.
So,
And say the name one more time.
Arise and Build.
Arise and Build.
yeah, we'll put that in the links below. So when they're watching this episode, they can just go down there and click on that and check it out and listen to one of the episodes and
Yeah, that'd be great.
catch it out. And we'll also have links to your website too. So that way, if they want to find out a little bit more about the ministry, get you to speak at their church or any of that kind of stuff, we'll make sure they can have access to that.
Yeah,
in
thank
the show
you. I
notes.
appreciate that.
So the other thing I noticed is you recently, were you tied in with TPUSA? I guess I should say Turning Point USA, because I thought I saw you were speaking at a church with like a conference that they were hosting or a part of. Is that right, or am I?
Well, I'm not tied in, although I do love Turning Point.
Yeah.
I was actually at their pastors' conference back in the summer in Nashville. They do a lot of great things. They bring in some really great speakers, and they've got the funding to do a lot of great things that more local people have struggled to get accomplished. So I was here at Grace Church.
Okay.
And they invited me to come speak. They have a civic engagement ministry at that church. So I think they have monthly meetings.
Yeah, they brought TPUSA. Charlie Kirk's been there a couple times over the last year. So.
Yeah. So I just got invited to speak to that civic engagement ministry. And so I ran over there and talked to him a little bit about the process and shared some of the inside scoop. And yeah.
That's awesome.
Are you finding more larger churches or churches are asking for you to come now more than they were before? I'm curious about that, because it seems like that's something that some churches are really starting to wake up to, and others are completely, still in denial about, or don't want to keep quote unquote separation of church and state, which is not biblical whatsoever, not even in the Constitution. That is one of the most bogus terms I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
I love it when people say it. I'm like, do you know where that came from?
Right. Unfortunately, so much of the church leadership actually believes that lie. And although I have had a few events in churches, in fact, I have one coming up the 21st of October at a church in Warrensburg, and I was in a church in West Plains a few weeks ago. So there are a few pastors who are coming along and are at least willing to let me use their facility.
Yeah.
And, put it in their announcements or whatever on Sunday mornings. But I would say across the board, there's a real lack of pastors really encouraging their congregations to get involved, and even with education. I think that is one of the things that Turning Point is trying to do, is they're trying to get started what Grace Church has done and start these sort of faith hubs inside of churches. And they bring in really generalized education, typically speaking. Just very general information about like biblical citizenship, and they get into the United States Constitution and how you can be active. But the big national organizations like Turning Point really don't have the state level knowledge and the specifics to really help people be engaged locally, or to be able to really connect the dots for people to actually take the action. So I feel like Turning Point is a great entryway, kind of a gateway for people to kind of dip their toe in and start learning. But then they sort of need somebody else or something else to actually carry them into the actual action part.
Yeah, that seems like that's I've thought about this a lot during COVID. A lot. I was thinking about the process of education. You said that, and we always hear churches, I always hear churches say, I want to be involved in the community. How often do we hear that? Or we want to engage the community, right? And up until maybe 50 years ago, school board meetings were held at churches. Okay? It wasn't even a federal thing until the 80s, right? Education became federalized in the 80s. So it was very local, and they were met. We watch old time movie or shows or read books like Christie, where, the church was central and the school was in the church. And there's no reason that a community can't have a church. It doesn't have a school. I'm not saying it has to be in a church, but somewhere along the line, this whole separation of church and state, through the 50s and 70s and 80s, got churches to be less involved, as if that's just something there. And then their accepted answer is, we've got privatized or homeschool. But the fact of the matter is if they paid attention, California's a great place. California just, in the past 2 years, tried to make it legal to where homeschoolers would have to teach all the same curriculum that they're trying to homeschool against. And if they didn't go to a state-sponsored, DEI teacher, they also tried to kick out the Bible. They were going to make it a hate crime book. And so, now they didn't pass, but the fact that it made legislation, and the fact that it made legislation and almost went through, it's kind of like that bill that just the governor of all people shot down in California about the ability for the state to take your kids if they want to do transgender, and they didn't have to tell the parents, and they could take them away from the parents. And it passed their legislative, and it was the liberal governor that shot it down, I think, to try to get garner something from the right side of the state, because I think he's trying to run for president if Biden peels over. But the truth of the matter is, and he'll be able to say, I'm a moderate because of that, or I'm not as radical as you think. I think that was the reason behind it. It's the only reason I can find, because it checked all the other boxes for him. There's no reason he didn't sign that bill and that he vetoed it. But that being said, my point of that is that went through their state legislation. That got passed as a bill, and a liberal governor had whatever motivation politically to turn it down. Otherwise, that thing's a bill, and now, whether you're homeschooled or not, they're going to take that. And so that's not that hiding place isn't a very good hiding place. You need to engage the culture. You want to be involved locally. Seems like the school would be, and you look at what's going on in culture, and that's one of the most local fights you got when we're talking about with all the stuff with the schools from the books in school. So many of them, when I would talk to them about that, they'd acknowledge your bad books. Yeah, Josh, but are we really there? Should we really be censoring? And I would say, I'm not for censoring books, but if a Playboy can't be in an elementary school, why can gay porn be in there?
Right. I'm sorry, but if we're at the school board meeting and we can't actually read the book to the school board because it's too graphic, then I have a problem understanding how it can be on the shelf at the school library. And
I agree with that, but even the other side of that, if they're going to show gay porn, what's wrong with heterosexual porn?
Well, I don't think any of the porn should.
Well, no, I'm not agreeing with that, but I'm saying the logical flip side of that is how do you justify that this specific porn is good, but the other isn't, right? How can you say only this specific kind is okay? And I'm like, you would not be okay if I walked in here and threw a Playboy in an elementary school. If I grabbed the 1992 edition with Barrymore in the July edition and threw it in the school and said it was a Pulitzer-winning magazine, because it won a Pulitzer. It was an award-winning magazine. It was so celebrated because she was the little girl from E.T. and she had her coming out and showed the world all of her bits and pieces. And Spielberg even took it, wrapped it up in a basket, and sent it to her for her birthday. True stories. And if I put that in the library for elementary and middle schools, they would kick it out. Why? Because it's inappropriate material. But because we're trying to push this agenda, we wrap it underneath okay, even though it's exact same content that you're not saying is okay. Right. So, and that's the thing is if it's on, and that was my process of thinking is how can you justify this? But pastors weren't jumping into that fight. I found that very odd. Very few. I won't say none. There were some in the community who did engage.
Right.
But I'm like, even showing up to a board meeting and just saying like, hey, and you're paying the taxes. That's the other thing. Like you're living in the school district, you're paying taxes. You don't have to have a kid. You can have your kid in private school, or that doesn't mean you are paying taxes. You're a taxpayer. That means you have every right to be at that board meeting and let your voice be heard.
Right.
And then the other part, participate in the voting process. If you know there's conservatives, let those people into your church. Let them talk about why they should be elected. Root out the ones who are calling themselves conservative that we were talking about earlier who aren't, and help filter this. Help your congregation understand a biblical point of view of filtering some of these candidates, and that's just at a local level of a school board, right?
Well, I think it's very complicated.
Yeah,
politics. It takes a lot of time. People have lives, so they're like, add that to the list. So how do you get people involved? I think if you know who you're voting for, and it's simple, and how that person is going to vote in the future, then you can make a rational decision. But people don't. They go to the thing and they just check whatever's names R D. Oh, okay. That's how, because the party's going to keep pushing whoever they want. Without the people's consent. And the people are just going to vote for whoever is on the paper. That's it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I agree on that. That's what I was saying. But if we can start to get involved locally, because they're not allowed to put D or R locally, just so that you know, they can just tell people, well, I'm the more conservative, I believe in conservative issues. But D and R from a school board perspective is not allowed.
That's even more so. So I go to vote at a school board meeting. You think I'm going to do homework on school board meetings if I'm not totally into politics? No, I want to go and know kind of, this conservative person. That's
but if
not, it's
right.
It's complicated. It's not
right.
simple.
It is complicated. I feel like this is one area that the church could, if they would, really make a difference. At least, now, I think the church really believes a lie in this whole 501c3 excuse that they have. There has never been a church lose their status over politics. It just doesn't happen. But that's what they've been told, and there's some fear surrounding that. I think also they don't want to upset people. They just don't want to make the more moderates maybe in the congregation. I don't want to make people in the congregation mad and upset, right? These are hard conversations to have. And unfortunately, I don't think the church has equipped people very well to have the hard conversations. So they avoid them, right? But the church could be, if they would be, at least an education place, a place where people could come just to at least get educated on those very things that you're talking about. Maybe they could have those candidates in and allow their congregations just to ask questions. Even if the pastor doesn't take a stand and say, I'm going to endorse this candidate or that candidate, we're going to have a forum here where you can come and ask questions and be educated, or even we'll take, 10 minutes from my sermon Sunday morning. I'll give up, 10 or 15 minutes, and we'll have one in a week or whatever. I mean, there's a whole lot of different ways they could help in that education process and at least help give their membership, their congregation, access to these people, if the church would. I have not found the pastors to be...
Jodi, that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, that was kind of where I was going, is they could invite them into their churches. And I would even say, hey, after the service, we're at 1:00 today, we're going to have 4 candidates in that are all running for the local school board. And we've got a list of questions as a church we have for them, but you can bring your questions, and then hopefully they'll help you make an informed decision. And then somebody could do that. And by the way, we're just like we put everything else out online, we'll put that on online too. So if you don't have the time to make the meeting, you can listen to our 10 questions and you can watch the episode. Or if they're not there, we submitted these 10 questions and we'll put their answers at the bottom of that episode so that you can see how they answered them. Or if they didn't refuse to answer, you'll know that. Yeah. And now, that just seems like a real simple.
It would be nice to have people that know what they're voting for.
That's actually one of my goals with this ministry, is that now I can't go around and do it for all of the locals right across the state. I can do it on a statewide basis, definitely for the statewide races. I can do it probably even in the state Senate races. But part of the vision of the ministry is to grow a network of believers across the state, and that we would empower people in their local areas to do that, to help educate locals about elections. Not necessarily tell people how to vote, but raise the issues, expose the voting records if there is a voting record, and ask the questions, get people engaged in asking questions, and sort of peel back the onion layers with these candidates and help people understand that this really doesn't have to be an intimidating process. The people who are filing to run for these positions are just like you and me. They're not, I mean, sometimes they're, higher level professionals, attorneys and doctors and things, but for the most part, they're pretty regular people, business owners, moms who want to get involved, and we just need to facilitate the access, right? Like facilitate the access. And like you said, even if we're printing voting guides by asking questions and giving people surveys and saying, well, we sent this survey to all of the candidates, but we only got responses from this one, and this one, and these other 3 didn't even respond at all. Even if that's all we do, it's at least something. It's better than nothing.
Yeah. That would be huge. I think even just that one piece of information writes off 3 people that I wouldn't want to vote for. Just, so.
Right.
Yeah.
That was, I think there's some things that we can do as a local body, just slightly, but it doesn't mean we have to get political, as you said. We don't have to pick winners or losers, but just make some, statements that are out there, and or even explain why they're voting. Like I remember, everybody's always been trying to get John MacArthur political, and he's always been, like I vote for righteousness. Mm-hmm. So I'm not a party guy, but every year, around the election time, right before the election, he'll usually be asked, who you voting for, and he will explain, I'm not voting for a perfect person. Let's first of all say Jesus is not on the ballot. Okay. And just like David had his affairs and things, we've got to pick an imperfect person, but we got to see who God has his hand on, and who I believe will be the best guy that is flexible to God's hand to lead this country. And this is why I'm voting for this person. And can I explain? I think that's a fair thing. That's not being political. It's not preaching it from your pulpit. It's just letting people know how you vote. Mm-hmm. Even that would be helpful if some people in the spiritual realm would start to do that. And the thing I also find very interesting, because you mentioned that they're afraid of their status. I do not find that problem when I did inner city ministry. They're very clear about who they like to vote for.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when I would go into African-American churches in the city, they often would say, hey, we're going to vote for this person. This person's down to see it, from the area. We're going to vote for them. Didn't give any biblical reason for voting that person, but they would easily sponsor and tell the church to vote for that person. Right. You go out to the suburbs or, the urban, you get past the city, and then it's always like, well, there's separation. We might lose, we might do it, or we really don't want to get involved politically. And I'm going, You're sitting here every Sunday telling me what's bad in the city, and they're easily telling their people how to vote all the time. And I won't say all the churches, but a vast majority of them, when I did inner city ministry, were very unshy about that.
Is that a fear of man that a church holds?
It's a fear of something. Maybe a fear of losing my tithe checks or something.
Yeah.
I think a lot of different things come into play there, but I have a friend who is really involved in the African American church, and we actually had a conversation about this. It's been quite some time ago, but she said, Jodi, the African American church is so involved in civics because of what the African American history of this nation is. Mm. So early on, they were fighting the government. Early on, they took really bold positions. And that's continued through their history. And I'm like, I never thought about it, but I can see that.
But I would even say that white Caucasians have. I mean, I think it just doesn't get the publicity that, when we think of civil rights, the first person we come up with is Martin Luther King, right?
Right.
But you realize that one of the major players also was Billy Graham.
Very true.
Billy Graham down in Tennessee and Alabama would have these stadiums filled with both believers on both sides, and he literally told the police in those areas, take down the barriers and let them all cross. And they mixed and mingled at his crusades, and he led a change in a different way. No, he didn't do the march on Washington, but he wasn't afraid to do what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and it ushered in that part of that change. And then
No fear of man.
no fear of man. Well, and then you had the Jesus movement out of the 70s, right? That we just watched that Jesus Revolution. One of the guys that came from that Jesus movement went down into the worst inner city sect of the country. And if you ever go back and watch, there's a movie about it where Tony Horn came out. Was it Tony Horn? I can't remember. The running back, the really good running back from like the late 70s, early 80s.
No idea.
Came out of it. And there was, I'm trying to think of it was in Georgia or Alabama. It was Alabama or Georgia, and it was one of the most segregated cities. It was like one of the last barriers of civil. I mean, there was a lot of civil unrest because of African American and a Caucasian. The schools were still very segregated, and this hippie walked up to the coach and said, "Can I meet with the team?" And yeah, whatever. And he met with the team and started a Bible study, and the team started coming to know Christ. And through that, this unity through biblical understanding starts to happen, and then the next thing you know, the school goes on to this winning streak that in this inner city school that wasn't supposed to do nothing. One of the kids becomes drafted, goes to college, deals with segregation in college, and again had a coach who was good, and then he would get drafted. I think he lasted about 8 years, got cancer somewhere along the line, if I remember right. But incredible story. I'll have to look it up. I'll send you the link sometime. There's a movie about it that actually has a lot of good actors in it. It has a ton of them. There's probably
I believe you.
Yeah, 4 or 5 really good actors. It was the same group that did Kurt Warner's movie.
I will not see that movie.
The Kurt Warner one?
Inspirational sports movies.
Yeah.
They make me puke.
Yeah. This one's more historical. It does have inspiration, but it's more historical about the segregation of the school and how this hippie.
I take that back. I'll watch Hoosiers. It's kind of inspiring, right? You ever seen Hoosiers?
If I have, I don't remember.
Okay, that's all right. It's
Do you like Rudy?
nope. Makes me
Really?
want to puke. Yeah,
Love Rudy.
makes me want to puke.
Sean Astin's in that movie I was just telling you about. He's actually plays the Jesus hippie. That comes to that little.
I'm sidetracking our conversation.
Yeah, we are, but it's a fun little sidetrack. So,
Sorry.
anyways, but getting back on track of it's interesting that you see that segregation of mindset, not in color, but in mindset between the urban area, and that is a good point that they were involved. I think that it's also a point of reference for a lot of inner city people. So. Yeah, things are changing though. I mean, inner cities are downsizing or being revitalized. So we'll have to continue to see how that plays out. I mean, the spiritual world continues to shrink in one way of biblical and yet expand in another way of all these other avenues that are out there.
Right.
So
I think regardless how you look at it, we need more people who are less afraid. Less afraid.
yeah.
Yeah, I attribute much of our problems in our society on weak men.
Well, I don't want to bash all the men, but it would help if we had more strong ones. That's for sure.
Yeah. So your ministry that you started, you obviously were talking about a part of it. Give us a little more breakdown of what your ministry does. So what are the bullet points of what you guys provide or do through your ministry now?
Yeah, so we want to inspire, educate, and activate. And I would inspire, educate, and activate any Missourian specifically, but we really want to focus on the believers, activating the church, inspiring them to be active and to be educated, more aware of what's happening. And like I said, I'm happy to bring anybody along, but I really have a desire. I believe God's given me a desire to gather the believers and start speaking to some of these lies that they have believed for too long, and help them be active. Because I think, you said it, I think when we first got started, they are frustrated and aggravated. They just don't know what to do. And oftentimes, if I can break down the information in a way and make it simple enough, and just give them really simple action steps because they are busy. They do have lives. They're taking their kids to practice and, doing all the things. We are so busy. Our culture has gotten so extremely busy. And I think that's actually a tactic of the enemy. Mm-hmm. But they are busy. So if I can break down the information in a simple enough way, connect it to Scripture, really prove the point that God does care about the government, and it is our responsibility to occupy until He returns, but then give them a way to occupy in a really simple, easy 1, 2, 3. Then they actually do it.
Yeah.
There are people who do care enough that they will do it if they know what to do. And if you can deliver that information in a way that's manageable and that they can take the action in a way that's conducive to their lifestyle.
Yeah, I like that. I like that because I think there are people that want to be involved, but like you're saying, time, difficulty, understanding, all that. If you can get those people on a path, I think the people that want to be involved will get involved if it's easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's good.
That's really good. And so are you trying to grow the ministry? Or you said you want to take more people on. So if people want to get a hold of you, the best way is what? Through your website?
Through the website, yeah. You can email me. It's jodi@jodigrace.com. So definitely growing the ministry, trying to reach more people, and plug them in wherever they feel like, sometimes they ask, well, what do you want me to do? Well, I can give you specifics, especially in regard to state government. And I can definitely help educate on other issues and topics, local, how to get involved with your school board and things like that. But really what we want to do is educate and inspire and activate in such a way that I think about it like, fireflies in a jar, right? Like we want to take the lid off so that you can do the thing that God's called you to do. I really believe that it's going to take all of us working together. And I don't have all the answers, but I know the one who does. And if you will tune your ear to Him and I can help you take the lid off so that you can be empowered to do the thing that He's called you to do, then I think that's when we win.
Yeah, and I've seen that you had some of the cool stuff too, like praying at the Capitol. You
Absolutely.
did that. And I imagine being in Jeff City, that makes it convenient for you to be able to be involved, because you're at the hub of our state's political thing. So you're conveniently close to the session. So keeping your ear to the ground and being able to provide that information as to what's going on, I would imagine is a little easier because of that.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, I live about 10 minutes from the Capitol, so I wouldn't be able to do it if I wasn't in such close proximity. But yeah, so anytime we do a rally, this last session, they did at least pass, the trans bill that protected our kids from medical transition. Mm-hmm. And we had a big rally for that. And definitely all the rallies and things like that I host, we always do a prayer service prior, beforehand. We did worship once a month. We brought in a worship team from here in St. Louis. And so that will continue on through this next session. And so just adding to the numbers, growing, reaching more people.
That's awesome.
I hope this doesn't boil down what you do too much, but it sounds like you're like a political usher. Like if you think of like a wedding and how like you get somewhere, you want to be at the wedding and you're kind of helping them.
Yeah, find their place. Yeah, that's a good thought. I like that. That's okay.
All right.
Well, Jodi, is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to share with people?
Well, gosh, I just want to invite people to be part, right? So I'm going to be in Warrensburg on the 21st of October, but then I'll be in St. Peter's here in St. Louis on the 28th of October at the Spencer Road Branch Library. So that'll be a free event. Would love to have people come out. It's from 10 to 1. And so we'll be doing some prayer and some worship and some education and just the whole ball of wax. So would love to have people come join us. Or, subscribe to the blog, subscribe to the podcast, and just come along for the ride.
Well, those are good things too, right? So all that supports. Well, thank you so much for being here, for making the journey to St. Louis to join us for the podcast and
to usher us where we need to be politically.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
Thank you.
Yes. Well, and if you've been listening, hopefully you'll check it out. Check out the podcast. Check out the website. Don't forget to do that and support if you're somebody who has the ability to do that. All things like that cost money for us, for her. So all these things aren't for free. So, and with that said, we'll catch you next episode.